Welcome to Comical Recovery. I am your host with the most trauma, comedian Jessica Byrne, creator of the upcoming Cartoon Buddies, winner of multiple East Coast comedy contests, and 35 consecutive years of life experience in the School of Hard Knocks. It's free to subscribe on YouTube, hit the like button, and leave a comment for recognition. Tell all your friends about your new addiction because sharing is caring. I am here today with a couple of good friends of mine, Scott and Becky. I forgot to ask you how to pronounce your last name because I didn't want to screw it up, so I'm just going to let you guys introduce yourselves real quick. Whomever wants to go first, don't fight over it.
Hi, I'm Becky Bolt.
And I'm Scott Donnet.
All right, and you guys, I know you through a workshop that you guys offer, but you have other things that you guys offer too. So I'm just going to start in with the questions that I have so that people can kind of get to know you. And I think the first question I'm curious about would be, what did you guys do for work before you got into what you're doing right now?
I was for several years a professional student. College, I was not in any hurry to get out because I was a biology major and there weren't really any jobs when I was going to college once you graduated. So I just stayed in and ended up at University of Central Florida, got my master's degree in biology. And when I graduated from there in 1986, I went straight out to the Kennedy Space Center and I worked there for about 35 and a half years as a wildlife ecologist and retired less than a month ago.
So you've always been a hippie at heart, it sounds like to
Yes.
me. That's awesome.
Absolutely. Grew up in the 60s.
Awesome. And then Scott, what about you?
I spent my life in the restaurant industry with a couple of side jobs, but 90% of my adult life in the restaurant business. I owned them, served, bartended, cooked, washed dishes, delivered food. Everything there was to happen in a restaurant, I did it.
Awesome. All right, so let's talk about the workshop stuff because that's what we're all here for. And I'm curious, like, when you both got into your first workshops.
So, I got into my first workshop September of 1991. And that was after about 5 years of therapy. I stopped drinking in 1986, February 7th, 1986 was the last time I took a drink. And I got into therapy almost immediately after I got sober. I worked with an amazing therapist on Merritt Island, and ultimately we got to a place where we were kind of stuck. She could see that I was doing everything I could to push through, and she wasn't able to help me push through. So that's when she had heard about this weird guy from California, and he was in town doing a weird workshop helping people get unstuck, and we were stuck. So what did I think about going to see this weird guy in California? Shortly after that, my wife at the time had an amazing sponsor who's my dear friend and a co-facilitator to this day, Marty Cunningham. And she was rounding up all of her sponsees and having them go to the workshop. Well, most of them had gone through, and right around the same time as Janet Helfand, the therapist that I was talking about, recommended that I go and see the weird guy in Melbourne Beach, she came around and talked to all of her sponsees' husbands and said, "It's your turn now, it's time to go." So for me, it worked out perfectly. I arrived, and there was several people around the circle at the follow-up meeting that I went to that were speaking right to me. They were talking my language, and I'd never seen them before. So I signed up, and that was the end of it. I went back for my first assistance weekend 5 months later in February. and I never missed another workshop for the next 4 years.
Awesome.
Yeah, so that was mine. How about you?
Yep. What about you, Becky?
I don't even remember who recommended it, how I found out about it, but in January of 2011, I did my workshop with Margie, and it was just amazing. I assisted a couple of times after that, but not very regularly. But then when Scott and I got together in 2013, and he was doing workshops regularly, I started assisting more, and now I've moved up in the ranks and try to help co-lead a little bit, and it's just gone from there.
Awesome. Well, now that we've talked about this weird thing called a workshop, I suppose we should probably explain to people that are listening, like, what exactly it is and what does it mean. I mean, you said that you were going to therapy beforehand, and then also you mentioned your sobriety. So, I'm obviously sober 2 years and 4 months, and I've been in therapy about 5 years before I got sober, and I definitely recommend therapy for my situation. I have outside issues, so but I found, everybody in the NA circle was talking about the workshops, and I never got invited until Jen mentioned it to me, and she insisted that I go, and I happened to be staying at her house in that time period, and Evan was going, her significant other, and so I ended up there with you guys for that reason. But I didn't really know what it was or what I was even doing. I just heard everyone else talking about this thing that I never really, like I said, got invited to, but always heard that it was this amazing thing. Just that, like, very blank, like no details, just this amazing thing. And it's the whole weekend, and you should go now because he's going, so you should go with him. Okay, I'm not doing anything. You know what? Why not? I will go and check out this thing, this mysterious thing that, So, what is this mysterious thing? I mean, we call it the way through, right?
Yep.
But it's been called a couple of different names, in its journey of progression. And it was originally for actors and actresses, right?
Yep.
So, how does that apply to everyday people, and why would someone at random need it?
So, let me give you the premise of the work. A couple of guys, actors, actresses, sitting around a bar, and they've done their day's work, and in comes their friend, who's also an actor or an actress, and they notice that their friend, who's been their friend for a long time, is almost always still showing up in character, right, from work. And because their work is acting, they get stuck in this role, this way of seeing and being in their everyday life. So I can't tell you how many times I've heard people say, when I explain to them that the work was originally created to help actors and actresses unravel from roles, get back to their center, and be ready for their next role, they're like, well, life's not pretend. Life's not fake, right? Why would I be entering into this thing about pretend if I'm going to look at my life? Well, we didn't say it was pretend. We said that roles that we had taken on had stuck, and we were stuck in those roles. Remember when I talked about being in therapy, and she could see that I was trying to get through this stuff, but she couldn't find a way to get me through. We were stuck. And I was stuck in this role, and she was stuck in that role. And when we were able to break through those, everything changed. We got all this dynamic work done. In fact, she released me and said, "You're all fixed." That's why I went back to the workshop. I was like, oh. So what they found out was it was instrumental in helping actors and actresses release old roles, come back to their center, come back to their inspiration, their magic, that zone, that reason that they became an actor and actress in the first place, and then be on fire in their magic for their next audition, for their next moment, for their next role. So clean and ready for a new thing.
And when you think about it, people say that the roles are fake, but every single person has multiple roles in their lives. I mean, all throughout your life, you're the kid, you're the son or the daughter, you're the employee, you're the parent, you're the student. We have multiple roles, and when you get into those roles, I mean, you're not being fake. It's part of your life, but sometimes it's just hard to be clean. It's hard to be honest and open without those things influencing and impacting everything you do.
Well, and they can't not, right? And then we add traumas, dramas, the stuff of life, and then they become overlays on top of those roles. And then we build on top of those our next roles, and then it becomes this mess of unchosen default actions that we now operate from because we didn't have a choice, or we couldn't cope, or we were saving it for later, or it was overwhelming, or we were loaded, whatever our case was. But now we're in a new place where we want to move back to that centered place. So we got to move that stuff off, and the work is about getting all that stuff off the top and getting down into that pool of wonder.
And it also makes me think about when I think about roles, I actually, and as you're talking about it, even with the actors and actress stuff, I think about emotions, because, the role that they're really playing is whatever their emotional engagement is with that character. Mm-hmm. And then when you talk about traumas, it's like if I, depending on how many traumas I have, even if it's just one, like a simple, I got into a car accident and now I have a fear every time I go into my car, kind of, that's the thing I think about, is that now I'm living in my skin, but in fear, so I'm fear-based. And so those are the glasses that I'm looking out of, right?
Exactly. And that's the glasses that you're going to see everything through forever until you release that fear of driving your car, right? And then we expound out that example into deeper trauma, or even just having to cope in a rough life. That overlay becomes a negative view, a sad view, depending on the environment that we were in. If you were brought up by narcissists, then you're going to show up in a defensive mode, trying to figure out what's going to happen to you next. Always looking. So everything that you do, even when that person is gone, for years and years and years until you're ready to work on that behavior is a part of every decision, choice, and relationship that you have. And when you release that, all of that past stuff starts rattling through your head going, oh, I made that decision based on that. I made that decision based on that. I made this decision based on that. No wonder I ended up there. I was following a natural progression of my life.
It's, and I like what you said about the car accident example, because so many times people say, oh, well, I don't have any trauma in my life. I wasn't beaten as a child. I wasn't sexually abused. I wasn't this. I wasn't that. But even we've had people in the workshop that had something happen to them in elementary school where they were maybe not even physically, but emotionally bullied. And they're now in their 30s and 40s years old, and it still is impacting how they live their life all those years. And so it can be something really small, or like you said, just one thing as opposed to a whole bunch of things. But if it's impacting how you're living your life and it's impacting it in a negative way, then clearing that up and getting rid of it because it will just do wonders.
Yeah, I mentioned the car accident thing because like you said, most people, or we're so good at brushing things off and being like, oh, I don't have a trauma, nothing affected me. When I found out I had PTSD, my therapist, the first thing she mentioned was that. She said, well, people that get into car accidents have PTSD. And I laughed because I was like, my mom was a drunk. We got into car accidents all the time. I mean, I didn't drive until I was 18 because I didn't want a couple of things. I didn't want to drive her around, and then I was terrified of getting into accidents because we had been in one almost every year. I mean, my mom has that reputation of getting into a wreck every year still. So she thought it was funny. She put a Band-Aid on the car, like an actual Band-Aid. Yeah. But that is from growing up with a narcissist, and so I, to get really deep for a minute or however long we have to, that's why I mentioned just the surface level thing, because I want to let people know that it can be anything, but also, I want to touch base on a couple of things. I mean, for me, obviously, we all know that I have narcissistic family members. I have 3 generations of it. So, it's not something that's gone away right away, but I am beginning to see that I am drawn to those kind of people because they're comfortable for me, and so that's where my journey has started. It's really just a beginning of opening doors of awareness. But if someone's like me and has like a ton of trauma, 35 years of it or so, and maybe doesn't even know that they're still traumatizing themselves, because that's what I was doing for, up until just a year ago, maybe even still do traumatize myself here and there, because once again, it's comfortable. Like how is that not going to be a terrifying thing to jump into this? How do you encourage someone like me, or someone that's maybe even had it worse than me, not be fearful and be open-minded to this whole process, because, it can be kind of scary and intimidating, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's one reason that when you hear or read things about the workshop, we don't go into a whole lot of detail about, well, you're going to do this, and you're going to do this, and you're going to do this, because it's just too easy for people to say, well, I don't want to do that. That sounds terrifying. But what we do in the workshop, when people come, one of the first things that we do on Friday night is tell them that you're in a safe space. This is a sacred, safe space. There's nobody there besides the participants that haven't done the work themselves. The leaders, the assistants, we've all sat in those chairs at the front of the room, and everybody that comes there to run the workshop comes with an open heart and with the attitude of helping this group of people address those things, and to do it in a good way, so that on Sunday night when we leave, everybody's jumping up and down and saying, this was the best thing I've done ever. So, and it consistently happens.
So yeah, I have to agree with Becky. It's, the container that we create allows people to go deep. I think the second part of that question, if I'm picking up on it, is, how do I then step out of the workshop and do my life different? When you take a look at and you start to release those old overlays, you said you're comfortable. We're not really comfortable with abuse. We're used to it, right? And because it never really becomes comfortable, we become numb to it, right? Comfortable is sitting on the beach on a really groovy day. Putting up with abuse and not having it distract us is kind of just learning how to cope with abuse. So once we remove those old overlays, we don't attract the same kind of people, but we're still in that old response mode. It's not like those old tapes get erased. I mean, I've heard people say that. I've heard people talk about therapy erasing the old tapes. I still hear all the old idiots in my head. They just don't have as much volume on their megaphones anymore. I have a second, third, and fourth option now to those negative self-talk voices, to those things that would make abuse familiar and somehow acceptable, and no longer are. And then I get new tools when I go to workshop, like the ability to recognize when I don't have a boundary in a certain place, to establish that boundary, and then to stand on that boundary, right? To stand on that line and not move, right? To own the space that you're in this, with this new light. And the new light is all the old overlays have been removed, and you're seeing life from a full choice perspective, as opposed to, as a result of all these overlays, I have two choices: ride or die, one or the other. There's nothing else I can do. These are the only two choices I have. When in reality, when I'm not looking through those filters, through those glasses that you mentioned, I got 100 choices.
I like that. It's like it takes me from black and white to a full spectrum of gray, and so I get that. You can make different choices based on that. And the other thing I was thinking about, I mean, obviously, I know from doing this a few times, is, my first workshop, I was not as open as I was the second participating time. And so I like that, I think that that's a comfort, that people can know that they're going to go as deep as they want to,
Right.
they're not going to have to, vomit all of their junk out. It's going to be whatever is comfortable and needs to be released in that moment, and it happens organically. But you have a specific way of discussing, like, kind of what happens during the weekend, the process, and I really like that way that you talk about it. It's like learning how to get there, right, the first day, and then learning how we see ourselves and how others see us. Is that kind of how?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Friday night is about getting there. That's your chance to load what you want to work on that weekend into your weekend. It's about being present in that moment, and bringing all of you with you, right? So establishing that sacred container, the safe place, and then what do you want to work on, right? Literally, we specifically ask the question, what do you want to work on? And then we dance with that a little bit, and that's about getting here, about really bringing your stuff and preparing to go in, right? So then Saturday gives us a couple of different views of how we see ourselves, how the world sees us. And then we do an expression exercise designed to see, where do you stop yourself in terms of expression? What are your rules that you have for others? And what are the rules that you have for yourself when you're expressing or when you're being in your emotion? And then, as I mentioned, it's a workshop that was designed and created for actors and actresses. So there's a monologue portion of the weekend that lets us, each participant, bring a 3 to 5 minute monologue that inspires them, that touches them, that's important to them, that matters to them. And I think the biggest piece of that is that reveals just a little bit about who that person is, and something that's important to them. It kind of brings to the connecting of the group. And that's probably the biggest piece of working on, discovering, and looking at what's your stuff, what's the things that got in your way, how did they, and making those discoveries personally, right, one-on-one as we move through Saturday night. Sunday, we give you yet again another couple of views on how you see yourself, right? Not only how you see yourself, but how you want to be seen, right? And then how those glasses see the world and the people around you, and how that reflects back on who you are and how you see, right? And how you hold yourself. We do some movement exercise. We do some voice work. Again, back to the actors and actresses. It's just a cool, fun, groovy piece and part of the weekend that allows us to be in our bodies and moving and being present with this healing process, right? So then we have a breakthrough exercise, and we move into inspiration, and we do some intimacy work, and then we close. And that's really the whole weekend in a nutshell. And, based on what I just said, I really didn't tell you anything that happens over the course of the weekend. And yet you have a basic understanding about the process, which is why, when you're in the rooms and you're dancing with folks in recovery, they say not much about the workshop, except it's really great. You got to go. And yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I wanted to, now that we kind of know, I love this conversation because we all know what we're talking about and no one else will, and that's great. It's like a secret society, it's a secret society.
Cult, Mark.
Yes, you have to come and see what it's all about. But when you were talking about the different layers of like seeing yourself, I noticed through the last workshop, it was interesting that, when I went back as an assistant, I felt more free to express myself. And the second time of participating, I felt myself be vulnerable and then pull back a little during some of those different activities on Sunday, as far as the movements go, and expressing myself through my body, I suppose would be the best way of putting that. And so that thought having popped in my head, what is your experience for both of you? Because you guys have participated in definitely more than just a few. I've done 3, and I'm looking forward to the next one that's coming up in June, because I felt like I almost got more as an assistant than I did as a participant, although I felt like I needed it the second time too, because I didn't, put myself out there like I wanted to after I participated the first time, if that makes, I know that makes sense to you guys. So, but yeah, you did 4 straight years and then some. Now it's over that, right? and Becky, you've been doing it for a while now as well.
Right.
So you're basically veterans. And, I'm sure now that's not a part of what you're seeing, but when you first started, was that something that you noticed in yourselves, like different levels of being comfortable with some parts of what was happening and then, going back and forth? Did it hit you like a wave, or did it just kind of keep expanding and opening? What's your take on that?
I think there's always going to be pieces and parts that, because of our personal histories and the things and the reasons we went to the workshop in the first place, there's going to be pieces and parts that are more or less comfortable for us. Some of the intimacy work I still struggle with. I don't enjoy it, but that just, if there's something that's bugging you, then that's what you need to work on. That's the thing that comes out in some action and says, okay, what's up with that? And so you're right, as an assistant, it's and even as one of the leaders, every single time before we start, we get in our little circle, as you know, and say, okay, how's it been? How's your week been? And what is it that you want to work on this weekend too? So I think that it's a process that never ends, because as far as I can tell, none of us are walking on water yet or have ascended. And I don't really want to, because it's always going to be a process that we can keep improving. And the more that we improve in our personal lives, the more available we are, and the the easier it is for us to help those people that are standing there going, oh, holy moly, what have I gotten myself into? I'm terrified. And so we're more available to be helpful for that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that works outside of just, outside of the workshop for me as well. I ran into a couple of friends that I haven't seen in a while, and I feel like the more that I work on myself, whether it's in recovery or, especially in workshop therapy, all those things, and the more I feed myself information and practice the information that I'm learning, the more available I can be for everyone, in my life, or that comes in, or that the universe slips in on the side, after not having been in their lives for a while and stuff. So
it takes all of your relationships to a different level. I mean, you can still have buddies that are just, surface chit-chat type things, but for a lot of your relationships, if you want to go there and they're willing, everything becomes deeper, becomes more important, and actually, for me, more enjoyable.
I love that you said that, because it reminds me, I've had 3 friends so far since I've been workshopping that have come to me and said, I'm mad at you. And they say that, and then I'm like kind of giggling and laughing and going, well, what did I do? And they're like, you made me think about how I act and my behavior. And it's like always this growth thing. They're like, I'm mad at you. You're making me grow, and I didn't sign up for that. I'm like, we cannot be friends, but you don't want to do that. But what is your experience with that, since you have, many workshops under your belt, Scott?
We teach best what we most need to learn.
Ooh, yeah.
And if that's the truth, then I needed to learn a lot. Right? So I'm still learning. I'm still trying to get it. I'm still trying to understand. I'm still trying to discover. There's moments where I react and respond, and I want to know, why did I do that? Why did I, or could I have shown up differently? If I didn't react, if I had chosen my response, what would it have been? Because I recognize that I didn't choose my response. I just responded, right? So then there's this piece that, and I don't know if it's the vow of the Bodhisattva, or if it's the promise, or that deal we make when we go into AA, or if it's just that I don't know. There's for some reason I don't want to not do this, because who's going to do it if I don't, right? So what's the thing in Alcoholics Anonymous? I'm responsible when anyone anywhere reaches out for help. I want the hand of AA always to be there. So I don't do AA anymore. I don't do the rooms anymore. But obviously that quote didn't go anywhere. It still lives in my body. Every time I speak it, it brings emotion with it. So that's my stance, right? So that's the mission. We're going to change the world one person at a time, because this work can change people. And if they step into that change, they can become new. And I know that because I was different, and then I was new. And in a small, teeny, itty-bitty way, that happens every single workshop. I get a little closer to my true, authentic self, because every time I go and do the work, I learn something more, something new, something different, a different perspective, a different facet of who I am. It's up, and I don't think we get done. When we get done, I think we got to go home, and I want to stay forever, so I'm good. We'll just keep doing this and hanging out.
Yeah, I like it. I'll keep going too. We're almost at the hour, which is totally fine with me. I have a ton more questions, so I don't know if it's an hour or half an hour. I feel like I'm not doing math well, because my thingamajig is confusing me.
What time does your thingamajig on your arm say?
Our arm says 11:25.
Yeah, well, that says, I mean, but my timer on here says 35 and then 10 minutes, so I'm just confused. Whatever.
That's okay.
I get confused all the time. Yeah, so I'm just saying we might do another one if this runs out of time, because I definitely feel like I have more questions about, I know that you guys have books and you do outside stuff, but I don't know that we're done with the workshop questions, and I kind of want to finish there beforehand. So, we talked a lot about trauma. We talked a lot about, like little tiny traumas. And I know that in the last workshop that I went to, there was just something simple with one of our participants, which, in my eyes, it was simple because I don't have a relationship or a marriage. So, but what about that? Like, so somebody doesn't have traumas and things like that. We go back to this role thing of, just being a mom, and having that be an overwhelming thing, or being a father or a provider, right? So, like, you don't have to have a trauma to go through this. It's just about, I don't know, in my vision, it seems like emotionally stuck, right? So, yeah, so it's emotionally stuck. Anything emotionally stuck.
I think a good example of that, as I said, I retired less than a month ago, and I think that a lot of people come to, and it doesn't have to be retirement, it could be anything. Your kids leave home and go to college, just any number of things, where you get to a point in your life and you're just not sure what's next.
Okay, so like even just getting stuck in a routine, that's what that sounds like. You get stuck in the routine of, that makes sense. I mean, that even makes sense to trauma because, like, in my worldview of being traumatized throughout life, but also being an adult, I just can relate to, well, I'm not going to feel that feeling. I'm not going to go through that grief because it's going to take up and consume too much of my time, and I have to go to work today. I have to pay my bills. My rent is still due no matter what, and I definitely don't feel alone in that regard of putting the face on to make it through the day. So,
well, and a lot of times it's not even that you're stuck in a routine; it's that your routine has disappeared. The things that you have been doing are now suddenly gone. We've had several times when people, I said the example of their children leaving. They've spent they've been a mom or even a dad for 20 years, and all of a sudden they're the empty nester, and that can be very very frightening, and that right there creates a trauma. Maybe they didn't have any trauma, but that loss of that routine, that loss of the lifestyle, creates something that they can't get past without some work.
So speaking of losses, then may as well bring this up. Then if someone has lost a person in their life, they can, that'll. I mean, I already know the answer to that, but for those that don't, we can do a little take on that.
So, I think grief is more than just an emotion, more than just an internal guidance system. I think grief is a state of being. It's a return to center. It's a return to ourself. When something dies, it brings us home. It hurts, but that brings us back to our heart. That we don't grieve and have excessive or massive amounts of grief about things that we don't have massive amounts of love for or connection to, right? So, and again, as Becky mentioned, grief doesn't have to be a person. It can be a person, place, or thing, right? So I can lose the stuff. I can lose the job. I can lose my mom. I can lose my best friend. I can
lose a house.
I can lose a house, or I can lose a body part.
Ooh, okay.
Right?
Yeah.
So, and all of those things need to be grieved before we can move into a state of now being in full choice about how we're going to react and respond, completely different than we did before, because this thing is no longer in our life. We're going to be different as a result of moving through the grief.
It also makes me think about recovery, because my uncle is he's 4 years sober, but he doesn't want to go to AA. So, I mean, this can be almost like an alternative to that. If someone chose to decide, like if the rooms weren't for them, because, sometimes I don't always click with some of the things said, like being a woman, first of all, and, having to drop the ego, and like, it can sometimes feel like I'm being told to be selfless in that room. And that, I think I've met quite a few people that's a hang up to them. And it kind of keeps them from coming back into the room and getting the help that they need with their addiction. And so, this is I feel like this is like a jumping off point, no matter what. It's a good place to be, to get the kind of, fellowship, so to speak, that room provides in recovery. But I definitely think it's way better than, the rooms of recovery, just because of the intimacy exercises and, the assistants having gone through the same thing, and there is just a ton of unconditional love. And it's different than the recovery rooms, because the recovery rooms, they still have really sick people, and everyone in this space wants to get well.
Right.
And I think that's the huge difference.
There's a couple of pros and cons on both sides, right? So you get consistent and constant fellowship in NA. If I am a mess this morning, I can go to a nooner. If I feel great this afternoon, I can bring my great, wonderful feeling to an afternoon or evening meeting and drop it off for somebody who's not, right? So having that constant available fellowship is good for both when I'm a mess or when I'm feeling great, because I get to give back, right? But it's surface. It doesn't dive into the meat of why I drank, what I drank at. It identifies those things and says, those are your shortcomings. Well, in the workshop, we do the shortcomings. Where did you birth that shortcoming? Is it your choice to continue to operate within that shortcoming, or are you ready to release it and replace it with something that you have no idea yet, but you're going to choose it in a minute? That terrifies people, especially people in recovery who want some structure, right? They want some structure because they've had chaos, and structure really is kind of a neat thing. Well, the workshop doesn't offer structure. It offers chaos. That ultimately ends in structure, right? That ends in a place where community can gather. I mean, men's groups have consistently spun off of the workshop. Women's group have consistently spun off of the workshop. Large groups of people that are connected 30 years later are still part of the workshop experience. But that's outside. That's as a result of making those discoveries.
Awesome. Well, I love that, and we're going to stop there for this part, because I think the next section, I'm going to just jump right into what you said about chaos, because I love that you mentioned that the workshop provides chaos. So, all right, that is the first half.
So